So with that, I'm going to go ahead and begin. I've already got Solid Edge, the Design1 interface up, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up the first model that we're going to look at. What I want to do is, this model is fairly simple, but it is going to give you a nice look at things such as live rules and the steering wheel, two of the tools that you'll see and use more than anything when working with synchronous design. In this particular case, let's just say, for example, that you wanted to manipulate some of the faces in this model and you want to make some changes to it. How would you go about doing that? As I move my cursor over the model, you're going to notice that different faces are going to highlight. And if I click on this top face, you're going to notice immediately a couple of things are going to occur. First of all, the face is going to highlight, but more importantly, the initial state of the steering wheel is going to appear, allowing you to grab that, in this case the arrow, and move that face up and down. Also, which will appear on the bottom of your screen down here, is what we refer to as live rules. Live rules monitor this model as we make changes to it, as we move faces to it. And the best way for me to demonstrate this is I'm actually going to turn off several of these live rules, and then as we use them, I'm going to turn them on and explain what they're doing as I'm making the changes to this particular model. Now, before we even get into live rules, let's just talk a little bit about the steering wheel and manipulating some of these faces. For example, when I come over to this arrow, all I have to do is just click on it one time and release, and I can move my mouse up and down, and I can manipulate the height of this particular model. So let's just say I want to come up, maybe at this point I can key in a value of, and in this case we're working in millimeters, so I'm going to key in a value of 12 and just pick that model up 12 millimeters. Now, if you want to be precise about this, and I'm sure most of you would be, you also can add a dimension, and in this case I'm going to use Smart Dimension, where I just grab the two rounds. It's going to automatically pick up the vertices and allow me to place a dimension on that particular height of the model. So if I want to change the thickness of this model and use a precision key in, we can easily do that. You'll notice too, on a side note, I do want to mention that when you identify a dimension, you'll notice the red arrow at the top, or as I move my cursor gently down toward the bottom, it gives me an option of which direction I want to move this particular model and how I want to move it. When I click on that value, it's going to bring up the option for me to key in the value. But I can also change the direction in which I want to move this model just by clicking on the green arrow. So it becomes very simple for the user to, at this point, go ahead and change the height to whatever they want it to be. In this case, I'll just key in a value of, say, 65. Now, in the same token, if I want to grab maybe the front face of this particular model, I can, again, just click on the steering wheel and drag my cursor to the right, and you see that it's going to extend. And notice what happens to the angled faces. They go to sharp corners. That might not be what I'm looking for in my design intent of this model. Another way to manipulate the face or this particular model is I can also identify other faces in the model to move along with this front face. Now, one thing I think is important is you notice my cursor. If I come over to we call this our select tool, and if I come over to the select pull down, you'll notice that there are three modes. There's an add remove mode, there's an add and a remove. We can do the very same thing with a space bar. If I click on the space bar, you'll notice it adds the green plus and the red minus sign. This puts me in an add remove select mode. So now I can come over and I can select two other faces that I want to move with that initial face I selected. If I hit the space bar again, it puts me in a plus mode only. It only allows me to add faces. If I hit it again, it puts me in the minus mode, and then one more time puts me back into the multi-select mode. So that's just kind of a side note. If you're selecting faces, a nice tool to use. If I grab that steering wheel again, Now you'll notice that it's pulling all three faces at the same time, and it's modifying the model, maintaining that 25-degree angle on those two faces. So if I bring this out, say 20 millimeters, and it will take that to 145 millimeter value. Another thing that we can do is if we identify, for example, one of these angled faces. For example, I'm going to select this angled face, and I'm going to hit the space bar, puts me in the plus minus mode, and also identify the angled face on the right side of the model. Then what I want to do is I'm actually going to take you'll notice that when the steering wheel is touched or changed at all, it displays the full contents of the steering wheel. And the steering wheel is basically used to manipulate your faces or your faces that you select. I can rotate faces, I can move them in their primary axis, or I can move them in their secondary axis. One of the neat things about this steering wheel is that if I go to the center of it, it highlights. It does highlight on whatever entity that you pick on this steering wheel. And if I pick the center of the steering wheel, just one click and let go of the mouse, I can bring it down. You notice I can kind of lock it into it. It automatically locks in to the edge. So if I want to maybe make a precision rotation, all I have to do is select the torus, if you will, and then it puts me in a rotate mode. So now I'm rotating this particular angle at a specific angle. Now obviously I could have selected the angle dimension and changed that angle, or in this case I can just showing you how I can do it with the steering wheel. So let's just say I set this to 3 millimeters. Now the other neat thing is that if I want to change it from the opposite end, just drag the steering wheel up to that end, and then again click on the torus and change angle from the top. So it really kind of depends on your design intent, what you're looking to do, and the steering wheel has the flexibility to allow you to make those kinds of changes very easily. Let's take a look now at, let's kind of start to begin to look at, well, before I do that, also I wanted to point out, I'm going to drag this down. I want to also point out that if I want to make a dimensional change, again, I mentioned earlier, all you have to do is click on the dimension and you can key in the value. If you have a scroll wheel on your mouse and you want to scroll this value, you put your cursor in this field and you can scroll that wheel. But if you're out here and you scroll, it's going to zoom in or out. If you want to override that and change the value when your cursor's out in the out here off the dialog, just hold your control key down and it will allow you to scroll that value. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. I'm going to rotate this a little bit to the top so you can see this hole. And I'm going to just kind of move this up a little bit. And let's begin talking a little bit about live rules. Now when I select this particular hole, you'll notice that the steering wheel, the initial state of the steering wheel when you select a hole entity is just a little bit different than when you select a face. Obviously I can move the hole left or right, or if I pick the secondary axis, I can move it up or down. If I want to change the direction of the primary axis and specifically move this hole in a particular direction, you'll notice I just click on the little ball at the end of the primary axis, and in this case I could set the angle by just keying in the value. We also can pick up key points. You notice I pick up the key point of that angle and it sets the direction of the primary axis, and then I can just click that primary axis and move that hole over toward that point. So it becomes real easy to make changes if those are the types of changes you need to make. The other thing that I'm going to do before I begin is I want to maintain my design intent. As you can see, the holes are in the corner and they look concentric to the outside corners of my model. So we'll come down to live rules, and we're going to turn on our first two options, and one is maintain concentricity or concentric faces, and also I'm going to turn on maintain tangent faces, which would be these two side faces to the outside corner. You'll also notice that in the steering wheel there's what looks like a blue plane, and if I click on that plane, it's kind of a free-form move, and it allows me to take that hole and simply move it anywhere that I need to move it. And you'll notice that the side faces stay tangent just as you would expect them to do. The other thing that you noticed as I was moving that is the opposite side of the part was not responding. Now again, if I grab that and I start moving it, you'll notice that the opposite side is not moving. But take a look down at my live rules. You'll notice the ones that are turned on are yellow. The ones that are not turned on still have the white background. The live rules that are found in this case are both green and red. The green ones I turned on, so it's saying, listen, we know that these are on, and these particular cases we've found, concentricity and tangency. The ones in red, it does find them, but it's telling me you don't have them turned on, so we can't apply them. We can't, apply them as you're moving it. So let's go ahead and change that, and we're going to come down and we're going to turn on symmetry. Now this particular part was built about the center of the base coordinate system for the model. It's in the center of our model, so it's going to maintain symmetry for us if it's turned on. So as I grab this particular hole again with symmetry turned on, you're going to notice now that my model is going to respond and update to any movements I make of that particular hole, and Live Rules is going to maintain my design intent for me automatically. Now you'll also notice one other thing with these holes is there's actually 3 of them. And we obviously have concentricity turned on and tangency turned on, but what about that center hole? One of the other live rules that's on by default is what we refer to as maintain coplanar axis. So when you have holes aligned, in this case in the Y plane, if you turn that particular option on, now it's going to maintain those holes in line as you would expect it to do. One final thing as we move this particular hole to a different location is that my design intent initially, or whose ever design this might have been, initially was that these faces are perpendicular to the base coordinate system. So I'm going to come over and turn one more option on called Keep Orthogonal to Base, if possible. And you'll notice now, again, that's one of the default ones that we turn on for you. Now, when I move this particular model, everything appears to be moving as it should with the design intent that I initially had. So those the sides and back faces are going to stay perpendicular to the or parallel to the base coordinate system. So in this case, I can just move it out and I can click to place. If I want to make a change, maybe I want actually to change the value of this particular overall dimension. Again, I can scroll that value. You notice when I change the dimension, Live Rules are going to apply as well. So let's say we make this 180. And maybe we want to change this one, and we'll change the back face. And let's say we make this 165. And everything updates again as you would expect it to do. I want to talk just a little bit about rotation and zooming in and out, some of the tools that we have. If you're not using a 3D device that allows you to rotate, if you're just using your mouse, if you want to pan, if you hold your Shift key down and use your middle mouse button, you can pan the model around. If you hold your Control key down and use your middle mouse button, you can zoom in and out. Without any control, if you hold your middle mouse scroll wheel down, you can just rotate the model. One other option that we have is just a simple tap on the middle mouse button, and you'll notice that my cursor changes and it highlights things, in this case, in red. If I pick, for example, a hole, and then I hold my middle mouse wheel down after I select that hole, you'll notice it's going to rotate about the center of that hole. And it's going to keep that until I reset that. So if I click again, I can come over and maybe I pick this line, and now I'm rotating about a line. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a heads up on if you want to rotate your model around. If I reset that one more time, I'm going to actually, let's rotate this to the back side of the model, because I want to make some more, show you some more live rule options that we have. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over, and let's zoom up a little bit so you can kind of see what we'll do next. If I take, for example, the side face of these slots, and let's just say I want to make them wider, a little bit wider on my model, you'll notice that I can grab that slot and I can easily move it back and forth. But the problem that I have here is only one of them is moving. So what I'm going to do is, by just clicking on the escape key, it puts me back in the initial state, and I'm going to turn on another one of the default ones that we have turned on. It's maintain coplanar faces. Now with that turned on, if these faces are coplanar, they're also going to pick up and allow me to maintain those coplanar faces as I make the changes to my model. And then of course I can click to accept them. Now one thing to point out is anytime you're moving your model around, you can come up and you'll notice that we have something called quick bar. And on the end of that, there's these called what we call move key points. So it gives us different options for selecting different types of key points. You might want to filter those down. In this case, we have center and front, or excuse me, center and end point. So if I'm moving these slots, and maybe I want to move them down to the end point or this side face, you'll notice that, actually, let me get it. You'll notice that I can come down to there, and you'll notice it shows that key point vertex pickup, and so I'm just going to go ahead and set it to that end face. Now when I move those slots, you'll notice that my faces, because they're coplanar, they meet the criteria of coplanar to those sides of the slots, they're also going to update. So we can just go ahead and click to place those. Now what I want to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And something else I want to point out as I'm doing this, because this has been a question in the past. If you're zoomed up on in an area of your model, depending on what you're building, and you decide you want to manipulate a face, you notice the little icon here, the little glyph that shows looks like a dimension. Basically, that's just feedback on the screen telling you that you're changing as you're moving the model, that a dimension is also changing. And you'll notice that 109.51, the length of the slot, that's the dimension that is actually changing in my model. So it does give you some feedback. Also, if you look down at the bottom of the screen, and I can't stress enough that when you're new to Solid Edge, the prompt bar becomes pretty valuable to most of our users. It gives them ideas of what the system is looking for as far as feedback. But you'll notice here it says live rules adjusting 20 faces. Okay, well I know that on one side of these slots I have 9, and so that means 18 faces are moving. But if you recall, we have 2 other faces on the bottom. But just say we don't know that. Well, the cool thing about live rules is I can come over to live rules, and I can actually suspend. Let me come down here and suspend them. And if I fit the view, if I suspend, I just use the shortcut key. When you suspend the live rules, what it does is it highlights all of the faces in blue, and then the user can actually zoom out and rotate the model around, and it shows them which faces are actually being manipulated. So if you ever have a question about which faces are moving, Solid Edge is going to, or Design1 is going to give you feedback as to which faces are moving during your process, or during the process of that manipulation. Another tool that I think is important for you to understand as well, and in order to do that, I'm going to zoom back up on this, is as I manipulate this particular face, let's say, for example, you might want to take the center slot out of this particular manipulation. In order to do that, Live Rules also has shortcut keys. You'll notice pause or restore is an R, the letter R on your keyboard. If I want to, for example, make a change to we call advanced live rules, I can do a Control E, and what it does is it brings up a dialog and highlights all the faces that are being manipulated. And what I can do is I can simply scroll down through each one of these planes and find when it highlights this center plane and take that out of the, basically take it out of the equation so it does not get manipulated during this process. Now that I've done that, I simply check that off, and as I manipulate, you'll notice now the center slot does not update. It's not taking part in this. And if I go ahead and click to place that, you'll notice now that this slot is no longer coplanar. So if I actually now make a change to this center one, it no longer takes part in those slots. The cool thing here, though, is if I want to reconnect it or remake it coplanar, basically all I have to do is just drag it out, pick up the key point, and reconnect it so that it's at the same width. And then when I go to manipulate, it's right back within the same group because it's now coplanar. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and Control-I to get back to an isometric view. And I'm going to turn off some of these dimensions, and I'm going to very quickly turn on a sketch that we created. Now this sketch was created initially on the top face of the part. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to grab that sketch, and you'll notice that a steering wheel is attached to that sketch, and I'm just going to go ahead and move that sketch to the top of my model. So I'll pick up the key point. Now you'll notice when I move it to the top of the model, the top face changes colors, and basically it's a light blue, and of course on top of the gold it looks a little bit different, but it does turn to a what we refer to a light blue color, and you'll notice what we refer to as regions highlight. There's a sketch applied to the side face, and you'll notice there's a circle, and then there's two lines that are tangent to that circle. So I basically now have three regions. If I, for example, wanted to add a round pocket on the side over here, just to show you how that works, I can grab the circle command. I can lock to this side, the side face by clicking on the lock. You notice it changes my crosshairs and also shows me that I'm locked to that side face. And then when I go ahead and draw on that side face, you'll notice now that it gives me two regions, and I can actually pick that region and create a cutout. Well, that's basically what happens, and we'll talk a little bit more about regions in the second example that I'm going to show you. But for now, let's go ahead and zoom up on this. In this case, when you're working with regions, select set. I want to pick more than one region. I'm going to hit the space bar, which puts me into the select mode, and I can pick the second region. And then once those regions are selected, I can pick my arrow key and I can add material, or I can simply remove material depending on how far I want to go. Now obviously there are different options up here. If I want to do it symmetrically, I can do that. You'll also notice that this is an open profile, and that's what I want to do. So I'm going to click on the open option, and then it just basically says what side do you want to remove the material, in this case, or add, and I want to do it from the inside. And you notice now I can create a cutout anywhere in this model as far down as I want to go, and it creates that cutout for us very quickly. So regions, and we'll revisit regions in the next demonstration, but they're very powerful. The neat thing about regions is you notice I didn't have to trim any of the elements back. I could just simply pick the regions I wanted to work in and do the job that I needed to do, which I did very quickly there. I'm going to just drop this down a little bit, make a little bit of a change, and I want to also introduce to you something we call face relate options. And for this one, I'm going to use the coplanar option. And I'm going to pick this bottom of this pocket, that flat face, and I'm going to accept that. It's also persist is turned on, meaning it's going to maintain this relationship. And I'm going to relate that face and make it coplanar to this face. And I'm going to accept that. You'll notice in Pathfinder, under a relationships collector, it added the coplanar relationship, and it's going to highlight and show you that relationship. Now the neat thing about that is if I pick that particular face and I move over, you'll notice that as I move my cursor up and down, because of that relationship making that coplanar, Live Rules is picking up and saying, well, they all need to stay coplanar, so we're going to go ahead and also symmetry is taking effect, and it's going to move all three faces. Now, if I come over here, for example, and what we call suspend live rules, where live rules are not being applied, you'll notice that that persistent relationship is still maintaining that coplanar condition. So you have the option to add face or different types of face relationships, coplanar, parallel, perpendicular, whatever that you want, tangency, and they're going to always maintain those. Obviously, I have an opportunity to go over and make a change to it if I want to, or even delete that relationship. But in this case, you can see how those work. So that kind of gives you a quick idea of live rules and how it monitors your model. It's going to help you maintain your design intent. And again, working in a system where there's no history, live rules becomes a nice assistant, as well as the steering wheel to make the changes to your model very quickly. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close out of this particular file. And I've got another file that I'm going to open. And in this file, we're going to, I'm going to go ahead and activate all of the parts in this file. I'm going to make some changes to a couple of parts, but I'm going to actually model the tri-bar for the top of this, where the handlebars are going to hook up. So in order to do this, we're in an assembly. It's called the fork assembly, and this assembly is made up of a couple of sub-assemblies and a couple of parts. And I'm going to go to the tri-bar. I'm actually going to in-place activate into the tri-bar. Now you'll notice if you're not already in Design1 or haven't already used it, we're in the assembly environment. And when I in-place activate into this part model, which I've already kind of given it a name and started doing a little bit of work in it, it changes us into the part environment, same environment that we were just in. I'm going to zoom up a little bit. You can see I've already included the top faces for this particular design. And I'm just going to come up to the sketching tools, or my draw tools, and pick the circle by center. And you'll notice that I can just, before I start drawing anything, what I want to do is I want to lock to a reference plane. Now notice the crosshairs on my cursor. They kind of infer, depending on what orientation you are in the view, what plane you want to draw in. In this case, we've got the XY plane, but you'll notice the crosshairs change if I go to the YZ. If I kind of get into the YZ plane, they change to the YZ plane. So let's go ahead and lock into the XZ plane, and you'll notice too that you can either click on the lock, or if you look at the prompt bar down below, you can also do a simple F3, which will lock you into that same plane. Then I can just simply pick up. I want to pick up center of this. It gives me feedback, so it's easy to find center. And I'm going to key in a value of, say, 30 millimeters. Now, that 30 millimeters is going to stick for the next circle that I place. So let's just go ahead and find the center for this. And I want to place one more for the center bar. And then I'm going to change my value to 40 millimeters, or 20 millimeter radius. And I'm going to find the center of both of these side ones again. And then I'm going to change the diameter value to 60. And I'm going to place that. Now you'll notice it's beginning to build regions. The closed shapes of the circle will build the regions for us. And then if I want, I can turn off the background components. Now, of course, you can always go to View and turn off the background components, but you notice a Control Q will do the same thing. So I'm going to do a Control Q to turn off my background assembly components. I don't really need them at this point. And I'm going to turn off the base, and let's zoom in so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. And then what I want to do is I want to finish the shape of my tri-bar by just sketching some lines, and I want to make sure that they're tangent to each other. So I'm going to click and place that. You notice it gives you feedback as to when you're point on and tangent to your design. And I just right mouse button click to get out of the command, and then I can simply click again to place a new line. And that's basically what I'm doing. So when I see the point on and tangent, I click to place it, and then I right click to get out of that command. And then I just continue on and finish my design with the last one. And you'll notice that it gives me several different regions here. Now, again, I don't need to worry about trimming. And if you recall, and I can unlock by clicking on the lock if I want to, I can begin selecting these regions. If I hit the space bar, it puts me in the multi-select mode, and I can begin selecting these regions. But when you have an entire area that you want to select, you can also, while you're in the select mode, you can also simply fence select all of those regions, and you'll notice that automatically puts me in the select mode, plus or minus. And then I can simply deselect the center holes, and at that point my extension steering wheel appears, and I can key in a value of, in this case, let's go down about 30, and it creates that model very quickly. Okay, I'm going to turn off the PMI, and what I want to do now is I want to build the center section. So I'm going to use a arc by 3 points. Now you'll notice that I can lock to a face of my model, kind of like I showed you in the other model. Again, I'm just going to use the F3, and I'm going to pick a point on, make sure that I'm point on, and I'm going to come over to the opposite side, pick a point on, and just kind of build a little arc. Again, now you can add dimensions and make all of this precision if you need to do that, which I'm sure you will, but this just kind of shows you how easy it is to get something out there quickly and then modify it if you need to, which we will do. Now when I go ahead and mirror that to the opposite side, I now have 3 separate regions. So I can grab the center region, I can remove material, or I can add material. And I'm just going to come up, let's come up about 50 millimeters. That makes that about 80 millimeters tall. So what I'm going to do at this point is I want to create a cut. It's going to be awful heavy if I don't remove some of that material. So I'm just going to use a simple line command. I'm going to lock to my bottom face, and I'm going to just draw a line, make sure I'm point on, and then I'm going to mirror this to the opposite side. And all you have to do is just touch the circle, and it'll show you the center point, and then I can just lock to the center point and then lock to the end point up there to make sure that it is mirrored exactly where it needs to be. Now I've got 3 regions here. All I have to do is identify which region I want to change. I can add material, I can remove material, and I'm just going to click to place it to get it out there as quick as possible. Now you'll notice too that on this side it's a little bit thin. That's okay. In solid edge, it doesn't really matter. I built this about the coordinate system, the modeling coordinate system, so I know that these faces are symmetric, and I'm going to reset my live rules to restore all of the defaults that we use. And you'll notice is if I grab this steering wheel, both sides are going to adjust for me like I would want them to. But in this case, I'm going to move my steering wheel over to the edge, and I'm just going to rotate it out just to add a little bit more meat to the model. So I easily rotated both faces out a little bit just to give it a little bit more meat in the middle here. And then once we do that, you'll notice that I can, for example, if I grab this particular round on the outside face, you notice how I can easily modify this model. And because that hole was concentric to that round, it's all moving for me very, very easily. If I want to, for example, maybe I want to change and manipulate, and I hope I'm not rotating too much for you. I sometimes forget that when you're doing a webinar that your system might update as quick as mine is. So I apologize for that. I'm going to go into the multi-select mode, or the mode where I can select more than one face. And one other thing I do want to point out is if there's a face behind a face that you want to get without rotating, you can take your cursor, say I want to get the face behind here. If I put my cursor there and just hesitate for a second, you notice that my cursor, 3 little dots appear, and it shows that the right mouse button is depressed. So go ahead and click the right mouse button, and what it does is it brings up Quick Pick. And that allows me to pick other things behind that face. And what I want is I want that back face. So now I have both of those faces selected. Now you'll notice where steering wheel is. I'm going to bring my steering wheel. I'm just going to click on that steering wheel. I'm going to move it, and you'll notice when you click the center point, you can move it wherever you need to. In this case, I'm going to put it on this face here, and then I'm going to use the Shift key and just rotate, and then I'm going to just kind of lock it in so I can rotate this face a little bit for us. And you'll notice here, as I move this face out, it's moving both sides because they're symmetric. Now notice the hole, and notice the angle of the face is kind of consuming the hole. If you go up to your options, you'll notice that there's some options called select set priority, meaning my faces were the priority, but if I change that to model priority and then I come back over and rotate that model, notice that the model priority means that the hole has priority over that side face, and so I can click to place and it's going to add the slot for that hole into my side faces. So it gives me a few options on Quick Bar, and you don't ever want to forget about, when you pick a face, you do have some options up here on Quick Bar to make some changes. Let's go ahead and quickly round our model to finish this up. I'm going to change it to edge corner and just simply fence select. I've got it set to 3 millimeters. That looks pretty good. I've selected everything. I really don't want the center hole to have a round in it, so I'm going to pick the inside face, and then I'm going to hold my Shift key down and just select that center hole, and you'll notice it takes the rounds off of that center hole. I basically deselected it. That looks good. Right mouse button, click to accept, and my model has the rounds that it's looking for. Now obviously I can go back and add my dimensions and do whatever I need to do to make sure this model is the right size. If I for example, do my Control Q to turn my background parts on, you can see that they fit in those holes, and they should. We used those to build this particular model. So what I'm going to do is close and return back to the top level assembly. And as I rotate the model, you can see that it is in place, but we still have a little bit of work to do up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the assembly, and I'm just going to say, use the option to show all components. And it's going to turn some components on that I want to fit this tri-bar to, and I'm going to use the activate to activate and make sure that these parts are active so that we can connect to them. Now you'll notice that the hole is not in the right position with this particular center bar. Well, the neat thing about that is being able to change that is I don't really have to go back into the part. It is a synchronous model. So right now I'm in part select, meaning while I'm at the assembly level, I'm selecting components or parts. But I can also go into, and you'll notice my cursor has a little gold block. That shows me that I'm in part select. If I change to face priority, you notice the glyph on my cursor is now like a blue face, which allows me to pick faces. If it's a synchronous model, I can pick, in this case, I want to pick that inside hole. And I want to identify in this case, I want to move it into the right location. So I'm going to pick the secondary axis, and I'm going to come down and find the center of this tube, and you'll notice that it automatically adjusted my synchronous model, or in this case, that hole, right to the center of that hole. So now I know that it is in the right location. The other problem that I have is this model's a little bit too high. I need to bring it down a little bit. So I'm going to make another adjustment. I'm going to pick this top face. I'm going to go in, use my space bar to get my plus minus. Pick my top face, use my plus bar, and I'm going to use pick quick, hesitate for a second, right mouse button click, and I'm going to pick that bottom face so I can move them both at the same time. And then I'm going to pick my primary axis, and I'm going to move the model down, and in this case we'll just move it down to the bottom of our ring here, move it into the position that I want it in, and you can see how easy it is to manipulate my model at the assembly level because of the synchronous model. Again, using the steering wheel and live rules even at the assembly level. I know this has been a quick 45 minutes or so, and we've looked at a lot of different things, and it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose if you're new to Solid Edge. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop, but I do want to reiterate that we've taken a look at live rules, and we've taken a look at a little bit of the steering wheel and how you can use the steering wheel to manipulate your model or faces on your model, while live rules kind of oversees what you're doing and it maintains the conditions that you have turned on. We've talked a little bit about view manipulation, face select, part priority select into the assembly environment. We've built this tri-bar very quickly using a top-down design approach from the assembly into the part environment in Design1. And I think you've got some really nice tools here to build your particular design.